Episode 19 with Melli O'Brien.
Where meditation meets daily life, this is the Meditation Freedom Podcast.
Thank you so much for tuning in to the podcast. My name is Siko Road, and this podcast is all about meditation and mindfulness, why people practice it, and why people choose to become more conscious. Today, our guest is going to be another guest from Australia. We had Tanya de Jong recently, and Melli is a internationally accredited meditation and Satyananda yoga teacher and an MTIA-trained mindfulness teacher. And MTIA stands for Mindfulness Training Institute Australasia. And Melli was selected by the Satyananda Mangrove Mountain Ashram, which is the largest ashram in the southern hemisphere, to teach their mindfulness retreats. And she also blogs about mindful living at her website. Before I play the interview and a piece of audio from one of her YouTube videos, instructions and explanations about mindfulness, I wanted to share something perhaps less mindful that I did the other day, just as an example of, that even people who have practiced mindfulness for a while can definitely still slip up and not be so very mindful. I have this bicycle, and it has, I bought a kit online that allows me to motorize it whenever I need to, so that if there's a commute I want to do where I don't want to have to pedal so hard or up mountains and stuff, then I can put a little motor on there and just run that little thing and get 300 miles per gallon. So it's pretty efficient, but it is a kit, and a piece of it broke off, so I ordered a new part. The part arrived, and I was pretty happy to put it all back together, and there was one bolt missing, and because I was not so mindful to put it all back together as it should be, I went ahead and got some gas at a gas station a mile or a couple miles away, and sure enough, I put the gas in, I turned it on, and the motor had shifted a little bit so that now it was engaged and it was jerking on the throttle. So out there in this remote garage gas station, the motor was now running the bicycle back wheel, and it was turning like crazy, and I was trying to turn it off, but it was running around in circles. So here was a rogue bicycle that was out of control, and I was spinning along with it because the bicycle was, going like 20 miles an hour in circles. This was a good example of not being too mindful and actually getting very dizzy as a consequence of my neglect in not putting all the bolts together. So the price I paid there was that I got quite dizzy turning around about 20 circles before I finally was able to turn that thing off. And my wife would have laughed her head off if she had seen me turning around in circles in a gas station with a bicycle. So getting back to Melli O'Brien, I'm going to play a audio segment of one of her videos that she put on YouTube, in which she is very eloquently explaining how mindfulness works. And by the way, she's also found on the website Quora, where people go to ask questions and get answers from subject matter experts. I'll make sure I link that on the website as well. So let's get started with a segment of one of her videos on YouTube.
So what is mindfulness, and what does it mean to you? Mindfulness is a shift in the way that you pay attention, but through that subtle shift, your entire world can transform from the inside out. When it comes to mindfulness, there's understanding it, and then there's knowing it directly in your own experience. Now, you might not understand mindfulness as a concept yet, but I can guarantee you've already experienced it. Can you remember a time when you were totally engaged in an activity? I mean utterly absorbed,
You weren't thinking about the bills or work or the things you needed to do later. Every part of your being was focused in the moment. Maybe you caught your breath at an exquisite sunrise, or maybe you experienced it spontaneously when you're out in the surf, skiing down a mountain, or simply alone in nature. Yogis and dancers know mindfulness when they lose themselves in the joyful movement of the body. And artists know it when they're absorbed in the act of creation. When we find ourselves in these moments, a deep sense of connectedness with life suddenly emerges. Everything feels alive, radiates energy, and emanates sacredness.
Scientists now concur with what wisdom traditions have long been telling us, that the keys to fulfillment and to true well-being lay not in the external circumstances of our lives, but the internal, the state of our minds and the quality of our consciousness.
Mindfulness is in fact the core essence of every wisdom tradition throughout history. It's the reason for every spiritual practice ever performed. And more importantly, it's the key to true and lasting fulfillment. There are three components to mindfulness, three ways in which our attention shifts gears. Firstly, our attention is held on purpose. Mindfulness involves the conscious and deliberate direction of our awareness. So being mindful, you could say, is the opposite of being on autopilot, which unfortunately for so many of us is the normal state of the mind for most of the day. And unfortunately, when we're on autopilot, the mind is really noisy. It chatters away ceaselessly and almost constantly. When you practice mindfulness, it allows you to wake up out of autopilot. It allows us to hold attention where we consciously choose. The second component of mindfulness is that we are immersed in the present moment. If we leave our mind to its own devices, it habitually wanders away from the present moment. It constantly gets caught up in replaying the past and projecting into the future. In other words, we're very rarely fully present in the moments of our lives. Mindful attention, however, is completely engaged in present moment experience, the here and the now. And thirdly, when practicing mindfulness, our attention is held non-judgmentally. We're aiming not to control or suppress our thoughts in any way. We simply aim to pay attention to our experiences without judging, labeling, or making stories about them in any way. Mindfulness then allows us to become the watcher of sense perceptions, thoughts and emotions as they arise, without getting caught up in them and being swept away in their current.
When you're able to live mindfully, you can literally transform your entire world from the inside out. And from that place, live in harmony with yourself and in harmony with the world around you.
Well, I hope that gave you a sense of Melli O'Brien's teaching style and her way of articulating these concepts of mindfulness. And of course, there are thousands of teachers and thousands of teaching styles, and all of them bringing us back to the present and making us more mindful and conscious and compassionate and wise. So with that, let's get right into the interview with Melli O'Brien. Thank you so much, Melli. Can I call you that, by the way?
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks so much for joining me on this podcast all the way from Australia.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm so glad that you invited me. It's a pleasure to be here.
What brought you to a mindfulness path?
I think when I think back, when I reflect on the really pivotal moments that made the biggest difference, actually, I think, way back to when I was a kid. And I think when most of us are children, I think we are mindful a lot of the time. We're really quite good at embodying the present moment and And I grew up around a lot of nature, so I had I spent a lot of time in very contemplative, I used to spend a lot of time alone in nature, so I've always been very contemplative by nature. But I have this memory from when I was 8 years old, and I was watching the news, and I think it was when one of the wars was on. I don't know if it was maybe the Gulf War, somewhere around that time. And I remember having this moment of feeling, I guess, a realization that the adults in the world, the people that I looked up to for strength and support and were the people that I was going to become like, were to some degree insane, that the world was not functioning harmoniously at all. And it really, really deeply upset me. Something hit home on that day. And it really changed my life, because I think it started a kind of what I would say was probably like an existential crisis as a child, coming to terms with my place in the world. And it became a little bit of a slippery slope, to be honest with you, into a kind of, depression and despair of some kind. Mm-hmm. And as I began to get older, this question kept repeating in my mind, I wonder if it's actually possible. I wonder if there are people in the world that are living in harmony with the planet and that live in harmony with each other, and that they don't feel despair and distress, and they have some kind of wisdom. So I started looking for that. I started looking for the answer to that question. Is it possible for a human being to actually just be happy, harmonious? Yeah, and that led me to, in the school library, I started looking at books about comparative religion and, books on self-improvement and all these kinds of things. And I started to look to those sources for the answer. And I did find some answers, perhaps not the answers that I was looking for at that time, but a curiosity began to be opened towards the path, yeah.
And this is like, at this point, you're now a teenager, so this is already a few years down the road, right?
Yeah, and at the time I was really living there were almost the depression and despair was getting deeper and deeper. And at the same time, I was opening to these, the wisdom traditions of the world. So it's probably in my mid-teens. Yeah, we started to really get into comparative religion and personal development, that kind of thing, yeah.
And so at some point, you probably decided you needed to practice something, right? So how did that development go?
Yeah, I did with my best friend. We did a course on meditation when I was in my late teens, which I found really helpful. Started to do a little bit of yoga, and I think a couple of pennies started to drop as well in my late teens. I started to get it. I was reading a lot of stuff on Buddhism and yogic culture and Eastern influenced wisdom traditions, and I started to get it. I started to get that my mind, that I could investigate my mind and I could free myself from the kind of patterns that were causing me a lot of depression and distress, yeah.
Interesting, yeah. And was there like a particular meditation practice that you got into, or did that change over the years too?
I was really doing very simple breath meditation back then, and although my practice has evolved in many ways over the years, I think that is a practice that I could do forever. So I still do a lot of just simple breath meditation. But yeah, I think it's not necessarily any particular technique that's changed over the years, but the way that the practice itself, the orientation of my attitude during the practice, the ability to just simply be in my practice. So yeah, some of the, I guess the quality of my practice has evolved a lot, rather than any particular technique.
Interesting. And so did you start noticing some of that depression that you were talking about earlier? Was that now dissolving a little bit or de-escalating?
Yeah, it made a huge difference actually really quickly, because I think what happened quite quickly for me is that I realized that I am not my mind. Mm-hmm. And that was liberating. That was unbelievably liberating to realize that I was separate from those things that I had been so entangled with and so identified with, and had caused me so much suffering. It was, that realization was incredible. And so I was really enthusiastic about utilizing that realization to my best ability. And I put a lot of work and a lot of effort into watching my mind, like almost like sitting by the banks of a river, mm-hmm. watching the current go by and seeing how it worked. And yeah, it really, you know, just even some simple insights like noticing that when I think bad thoughts, it makes me feel bad. And then being able to choose to drop it when I found that it wasn't serving me. I mean, that was just absolutely incredible. It's absolutely life-changing.
Mm-hmm. So there was an element of slowing down, and some religions will call it witnessing.
Absolutely.
Instead of being the story, you're now seeing it's just something that comes and goes like clouds in the sky, kind of.
Right. Exactly. And, you know, and then two things happen there, right? The one thing that happens is you have this incredible opportunity for liberation and seeing the ways that you get caught up when you're no longer the witness, but you've fallen in the river of the current of thoughts and emotions, and you're playing it out. And then, you know, you again and again can choose to have more and more liberation. But the other wonderful thing that happens, well, that happened for me rather, is that the noticing of the fact that when I'm not caught up, when I'm witnessing, as you say, I felt so at home. I felt so, just in a natural state of contentedness, and had a very deep sense of being connected with life, mm-hmm. which it just felt like home. So the noticing that what really actually made me happy was not the things that my culture was telling me was going to make me happy, you know, the white picket fence dream, the perfect relationship, the achievements, all of that stuff. Right. But actually what made me really happy was just being the witness, just actually sitting in my own beingness was enough. And that was a really wonderful realization as well to have at a fairly young age, because it, I guess, kind of, I avoided getting caught up in a lot of the things that I probably would have gotten caught up in as well. Yeah.
Yeah, so you avoided a whole bunch of struggles that way. You got into this early, investigating why you were unhappy and unpeaceful feelings and things. It sounds like you got started with that very early.
Yeah, and part of the reason for that, if you want to sort of talk about how I got into this journey, something that I speak about at my retreats a lot, is the fact that when I was 19, I was working in a nursing home. So I was working with people that were coming to the end of their life, and they were sharing their wisdom with me about what truly makes a wonderful life and what doesn't. And that was also a huge catalyst for me to focus on embodying the present moment, living the moments of my life, so that when I got to the end and looked back, I wouldn't have regrets, so to speak. I wouldn't, because the message that they would tell me a lot of the time was that, you know, it's not the things that your culture is teaching you that are supposed to make you happy doesn't do it. Right. It's just being alive to the moments of your life. That's what really matters. And I was told that over and over and over again. So that was a real catalyst for not getting caught up as well.
And also, it sounds like the more awareness you have of death, the more you also start realizing how important it is to make choices on each moment on what attitude and how you're going to live your life, right?
Yeah, it's very true. It's a really, I think the avoidance of that just the simple fact that we are, we're mortal, and that life is always changing, and that, there's quite a bit of uncertainty in life, and that this body that we're in doesn't last forever. It's confronting and really freeing at the same time. I think it's, living with that in mind puts everything in perspective. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And have you seen any other changes or results or benefits from it that you didn't think of when you started the practice?
Yeah. Just I think one really wonderful thing is just not taking it all so seriously. That I think I went through a phase, a typical phase that I think a lot of people experience of just, I think, taking it all a little bit too seriously. So I'm very much, I'm much more gentle and kind to myself than I was when I was younger. Much less serious about everything. I'm, laugh a lot more, and my gosh, I make plenty of mistakes, and I stuff up all the time, and I'm very human, and I do get caught up all the time as well. I get caught up and I catch myself, and in the past I might have been really self-critical about that, especially, if you're a mindfulness teacher, oh, you can't do that. Taking out, being really hard on myself. And these days, I've lightened up a real lot, and I treat myself a lot more kindly than, and what the wonderful thing about that is that I have so much deeper connection and kindness with others from treating myself with much more kindness and being, willing to see the ways in which I do get caught up and stuff up all the time. So yeah, that's been a really nice, not a surprise, because I've always been a kind of a light-hearted person who really enjoys humor, but it's been a delightful unfolding that sort of has just unfolded by itself, which has been, really lovely.
That's great. And so do you sense that part of that is because you didn't go with one singular religion or institution? So I'm wondering about that, because it's kind of interesting, because you mentioned on your website that you teach without the dogma, and maybe you can explain a little bit more about what you mean by that too.
Yeah, sure. It seems like my path, for whatever reason, was to, I think this is partially just something in my personality. I really enjoyed, in those younger years, seeing that when I was looking at all of these different religions, and I was curious about every single one of them. I wanted to know every single one of them, no matter what people's opinion of them was. I noticed immediately that there were absolutely similarities, and I began to clue on to the fact that there seemed to be one perennial philosophy, one universal teaching, but they were using different words. Mm-hmm. And the more I looked, the more it became absolutely 100% apparent that there really is just, this is not a Buddhist thing. Mindfulness is not a Buddhist thing. I mean, I get in trouble with Buddhists when I say that sometimes, but it's not a Buddhist thing. Mindfulness is a Buddhist word. It has roots in Buddhism, but the actual practice of mindfulness, which is stepping out of autopilot mode and switching, a way of consciously switching attention and being fully embodied in the present moment and disidentified from the mind, that is in every single wisdom tradition around the world. People have used different words for it, but it's the same teaching. Mm-hmm. What I love about this approach is that you can draw down from the essential teachings of all these different wisdom traditions and not get dogmatic about this is my way or this is the only way and you're doing it wrong. It's very open and spacious and kind and accommodating of everybody's path, because we're all kind of doing the same thing, but we may go a different way with it. So when I teach my retreats and and courses, I quote probably from every different wisdom tradition around the world, different teachers, different time periods, but there's no dogma, as in I'm not teaching you Buddhism, I'm not teaching you this, I've got no secret motive to kind of sign you up for anything. It's just, here's this one teaching, this is how you end suffering. This is what essentially the wisdom traditions of the world can be broken down into two core teachings. The teaching number one is that the normal state of human consciousness has a tendency to lead towards suffering. And the second teaching is that there's a way to wake up out of that suffering. So teaching number one is a kind of like a diagnosis that the normal state of human consciousness seems to have some kind of dysfunction in it when it's untrained, and it normally does have a tendency to lead down to suffering. And yeah, teaching number two is really simply, there is a way to wake up out of dysfunction and come back to clarity, back to harmony, and really the essential way to do that. I may be accused of oversimplifying things here, but the essential way to do that is through practicing mindfulness. When it all comes down to it, the reason why I really have just boiled down my teaching to just it's mindfulness that really matters, because mindfulness helps us. Mindfulness is the means by which we come home to ourselves, and it's also the means by which we disidentify from the mind, and that really is the key to the ending of suffering.
And the mind kind of tells you that you're separate, right? That's kind of what the human history is, as a lot of it is about, feeling separate. And when you feel separate, you're more likely to run astray and get involved with being discontent or wanting something other than what you already are and things like that, right?
Yeah, I think I think that you're exactly right there. Basically, when you're identified with the mind, it creates a sense of separateness from the world. It creates a strong sense of me. I am, I need, I want. And even in one moment of mindfulness, if you pay attention, when you embody the present moment and really fully and deeply, and there's a disidentification from the mind. So there's the mind, and here you are as the witness. And immediately if you pay attention to what's going on in that moment, that sense of separation fades into the background quite quickly. That sense of being a separate self that has all these complex needs and wants and fears, it fades into the background quite quickly. So those are the two core teachings. And to answer your first part of that question, I think that the sense of warmth and compassion and gentleness and kindness towards myself, I think that's something that's unfolded as part of the practice. But also I do think that this very open and accommodating attitude towards the world's wisdom traditions, it definitely makes me feel a lot more warmth and connection to everybody, but also those who may feel differently to me about what the right way is to find home.
Right. Yeah, it sounds like there's a lot of letting go as part of that, letting go of certain conditioning. And when things get institutionalized, they seem to involve all kinds of agendas and things that kind of are removed from the heart of the teaching, the wisdom tradition.
Yeah, I think that there was a resistance in me to hunkering down with any one way, because I think there's something in me, maybe, I don't know whether it's my personality or the observation of what you're saying. I've seen this over and over again when I've gotten involved in different types of teaching, that we all do have a tendency to think that our way, we can get a little rigid. Right. Yeah. So I didn't want to hunker down with any one way. I love them all. I love Buddhism. I love mystical Christianity. I love Sufism. I love them all. They all have so much beauty and wisdom. and so much to offer. And there's been wonderful teachers who have absolutely embodied the teaching and embodied the practice 100% in every different wisdom tradition around the world, and they all they all have so much to share. So how could I hunker down with one when there's so much beauty in all of them to draw from? So yeah.
Right, and in a sense, once you get past the clothes and the traditional, the ceremonies and all that, you see that you're all naked and brothers and sisters. So then there isn't all that where you just see the form of a religion, but you see behind the heart that's the root of the religion.
Yeah.
It seems like you're getting more in touch with that, and that's very beneficial, because sometimes people get discouraged because they may have had a run-in with the form of a religion, and they may have gotten disillusioned about it. And so it's really nice to hear you talk about going back to the heart of religions as a prescription for suffering, and looking at the root causes rather than symptoms.
Yeah, and I think you said it really nicely there. When you said when you get it feels like there's these surface differences and ceremonies. Essentially what a wisdom tradition or a religion is made up of is practices, teachings, and stories. So you have these three elements, some parables that Jesus used to tell, and some teachings in the Bible that are mixed with stories, and certain practices or ethics. And interestingly, if you look at the ethical component, the ethics of all the world's religions and wisdom teachings, I think, I look at those as kind of, these are if you live your life with this foundation, if you live your life with this foundation of ethical behavior, and health, then it's going to be much easier for you to be aware and awake and to feel what is there at the depths of your being, which is, the essence of who you are. And when you're able to feel that, you can live your life in harmony, and you can live your life from a place of feeling really a part of an evolving dance of evolution in this universe, part of something really wonderful. And I think the reason why those ethical codes are there is because if they're not, it's fair, and you want to just go straight to practicing mindfulness and feeling the depths of your being, you're really making it difficult for yourself. You're making it really hard if you're going to be having affairs and stealing and having people after you, and you're going to try and practice. It's going to be really difficult for you. So I think,
Right.
I think that even those ethical things, they have the same suggestions in all the world's wisdom traditions. Let your life be fairly simple. Be around nature. Keep it fairly. Don't. You're going to make you're going to make it difficult for yourself if you go and kind of make it all convoluted and complex. So if you keep things fairly simple, give yourself some spaciousness, then you're setting up good conditions. However, I don't believe that they were meant to be rules, and I don't believe that they were meant to be really, these dogmatic, rigid things that if you stray from that, you're a bad person and you've sinned. And I think it was more like, if you want to touch into the essence of who you are, then these are things that are going to be very helpful ways of living for you.
Right. And the mindfulness will eventually help people become more conscious and see, how their behavior can either harm or help others and themselves. And that's probably encouraging too on the path.
Absolutely, yeah. Mindfulness in itself, if you're talking to a Buddhist, they have an incredibly nuanced description of what mindfulness is. It can be very simple, and then it can be very highly nuanced. And one thing that's really important to know about mindfulness is that it creates insight. So you watch your mind and you have these insights about the way that you get caught up, and then that gives you the opportunity to take intelligent, wise action that, alleviates suffering. So, for example, I might notice that, when I am criticizing myself really harshly, it's actually futile. It doesn't make me a better person. It doesn't stop the behavior I'm trying to stop by beating myself up mentally. And you just see the futility of it. And then you go, well, actually compassion is something that actually works a lot better. I treat myself with kindness, and that's actually a much more intelligent approach to doing what it was that I was the result that I was trying to get. Does that make sense?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, for sure.
Mm.
And as a teacher, have you noticed that people come for all kinds of reasons? And do people struggle, your students, what particular struggles do they have? Or do you see any, maybe you can just give some idea of what you've seen people struggle with and how they then overcome those struggles or work with those struggles through their practice?
I think one of the things that we all, myself included, and it's common, especially in the beginning, to have the challenge of, noticing that the mind has wandered, and then at the moment that you notice that the mind has wandered and you've slipped into autopilot again, at that moment we all have a tendency to be quite self-critical. Mm-hmm. And what's not realized is that actually in that moment where you have a momentary awareness, you've woken up from the dream of thought, so to speak, and then in that moment that self-criticism comes in the door and says, oh my God, I'm so hopeless, I can't even be awake for 2 seconds, or whatever it is, I can't do this, or I'm really blah blah blah, I've got the most unruly mind in the world, everyone else can do it except me. What we don't notice is that that's the voice coming straight back in the back door again. So it can be quite seductive, the ways with which our mind kind of, allures us again. So one of the things I always tell my students and practice myself is that at the moment when you wake up, to really have a moment of congratulating yourself for waking up and noticing how it feels to be awake. Like, how does it feel? I'm awake. I've just come out of mind wandering, and to notice that it's really a joy to be awake. Mm-hmm. And then with a warm, gentle, very kind attitude, drawing the mind back to the breath or whatever it was that was the focus of attention. So I think that, especially in the beginning, our minds are so wild. And not even in the beginning, I've been practicing for a really long time, and I have days when I sit down on the cushion and it's just crazy.
Yeah.
It's not like it, it's not like I never have those moments, but in the beginning especially, the mind can seem really unruly and it can be really frustrating. You have them in the moment you wake up, you get frustrated, and your practice can get a tension and a tightness in it. So that act of congratulating yourself and being really kind in the way that you come back, it immediately makes the whole practice much more rejuvenating and much more easeful.
Yeah.
I would say that that's one of the biggest things. And the other thing that I think, again, for all of us is encountering negative, or you could call them negative, difficult emotions during the practice. Mm-hmm. So they can have quite a gravitational pull. And so the way that we tend to react when that happens is we want to avoid or suppress. We want it to go away, not realizing that actually generally perpetuates it. Right. So, it's that old saying, whatever you fight, you strengthen, what you resist persists.
Yeah.
So with mindfulness, you do something, that's quite courageous and really wise, is actually to stop the running and gently, kindly turn towards exactly what it is that we're feeling in that moment. So if you were doing a breath meditation and then something like anxiety comes up, or even boredom, which comes up, quite a agitation comes up quite a lot in practice for a lot of people. Now you can leave the breath for that moment and actually focus completely on what it feels like in that moment without inhibition, to just feel what you're feeling. what is it? Anxiety might actually, when you feel what you're feeling and you break the loop of avoidance, it might actually boil down to just being a strange feeling in the tummy and a little bit of labored breathing, maybe some tension. And so it's not as big and scary a thing as it was before. So we gently turn towards it, and you could even say to yourself, if it's helpful, I find it helpful to say, there's anxiety in me, there's embarrassment in me, or, that kind of thing. And accepting that it's there and knowing that all emotions come and go, being with it and noticing its changing qualities as part of the meditation practice. Yeah, and it's wonderful because it immediately disidentifies you from the emotions. So again, it's like that. Here you are as the awareness, and there's the emotion. And so it's quite liberating in itself. And then, if needed, you can investigate what's going on from there, and choose some wise action if it's needed. But most of the time in our practice, it's really just being with it and allowing it to be without struggling and without fighting, and allowing it to come and go as it does.
That's great. And do you find that people who come to your retreats and practices, did they sit on their own at first, but then they find benefit by sitting in a group and maybe having some encouragement from a teacher like yourself?
So are you saying, were they practicing alone before they came to the retreat, and then did they find benefit from being in a group?
Well, perhaps, yeah, because, like what you mentioned earlier, is when people get really discouraged with practicing and they think, I'm not good at this stuff, I'll never be good at meditation, and sometimes they walk away from the practice. But if they have a community of people or a teacher that helps encourage them, then sometimes that can be helpful to say, hey, that's okay, just let it go and come back to your breath. Sometimes that seems to help people, is to have an encouragement.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that includes myself. I go on retreats, at least 2 retreats every year, with teachers that I really respect, and community is very, very helpful. I mean, mindfulness, like any other skill, meditation, like any other skill, is you benefit a lot from having somebody who's walked the path before you. If you want to learn golf, it could be great to just you can like practice a lot on your own, and then go to someone who's played a lot of golf and is a golf teacher and get some pointers. That can be really, really, really helpful. And then go off and practice again, and then you have that support there of somebody who can have your back.
Right.
You can ask questions too if things get troublesome in any way. Yeah, it can be really helpful, and I still utilize that myself. I find it really helpful myself. So yeah.
And then it also in turn helps when you do practice on your own, because most people do have their 7 days in the week, and if they go once a week or once a month to a group, then there's still all those other days in between where they practice on their own.
Yeah. There's no substitute for practicing. There really isn't. It seems to me, and I have experimented with this over the years, the kind of the thinking of, you don't really have to practice. You can just embody the present moment in everyday life. And, I tried that. And I found that, after trying that for a couple of months, I really just wanted to go back to my practice, because it's like a fitness. It's like a muscle, that time of your day where you take out to just tune into just being, just in a world that's so obsessed with doing, taking some time just to be every single morning is like an oasis. It's such a special, precious thing. So I really don't think there's a substitute for practicing every day, and practicing in the morning especially. I mean, we're all different. Some people are night owls and it suits them better to practice at night, but practicing in the morning, wow, that energy just really carries you through the day. And yeah.
And then it's easier to be present, fully present for the rest of the day.
That's my experience. Yeah. But I also acknowledge that we're all different. We have different personality types and inclinations. So again, I don't believe there's any right way or any one way. But I find that when I practice every day, or, almost every day, I have a day off here and there, but it's, that energy of beingness just carries through my days. So it's, yeah.
Wonderful. Any final thoughts on anything that was said that maybe you want to say a little more on?
Oh gosh, there are so many beautiful teachers in this world, and I feel really privileged to have been able to touch in with so many different ways of becoming present. But as I sit here speaking to you right now, I'm looking out my window on our 8-acre property. I'm just surrounded by nature, and it occurs to me that one of if somebody would ask me, do you have a guru, or do you have a favorite teacher? And I would say that my greatest teacher has always been nature. Mm-hmm. And we're a part of it. We're a part of this incredible, evolving, unbelievably mysterious universe. And I think nature is a great teacher in the way that it ebbs and flows with the way of things without any resistance. And so I would say that nature is my greatest teacher, and I think there is the observation of the close observation with nature, this close observation of nature, the natural wildlife, just being in trees or even cloud watching, is a wonderful, wonderful teacher. Watching how things come and go with such grace and ease. So, yeah. That's
wonderful. Yeah, I agree. For me, that's huge as well in terms of teaching and feeling at home, all of nature. Well, thank you so much. And do you have any websites that you want to share with the audience in case somebody wants to follow up with you and learn more about you?
Sure. Well, I have my website is mrsmindfulness.com, so mrsmindfulness.com, and have events mostly in Australia that I run. I specialize in immersion learning, so multi-day immersion retreats into learning mindfulness or practicing mindfulness, and also blog about mindfulness on that website. So once a month or twice a month, I'll send out a really good piece of content, I hope, that will be helpful to anyone practicing mindfulness out there. And there are also some free audios and that kind of thing on the website. So yeah, you can check out the website and stay in touch. That'd be wonderful.
Thanks again. I hope you have a great rest of the day. It's getting night here and your day's just starting.
It is, yeah. I'm just getting started, just getting ready for the rest of my day.
Thanks again so much, Melli, and I hope you enjoyed listening to this interview. And if you have any questions or you want to read the show notes, go to meditationfreedom.com/19. Please let me know what you think of it. And of course, if you're interested, feel free to sign up for the email list that'll pop right up as soon as you get on the webpage. Next week, we're going to be talking with someone who is a builder and a contractor, and he is changing the way he builds as a result of his meditation practice. So that should be interesting as well. Well, I hope you have a wonderful rest of the week, and until then, take care.
Thank you so much for joining us on the Meditation Freedom Podcast, where meditation meets daily life.